On Christmas morning, while the Jackson family prepared the table, set out the gifts, and waited for a daughter they trusted with their whole world, a message traveled quietly across a stretch of winter roads. A message no one expected. A message that would pull apart everything they thought they understood about that morning. Helen Jackson was missing. Not late. Not delayed. Not stuck in traffic. Missing. Her seat at the table stayed empty. Her phone, silent. Her car, nowhere along the route she had taken countless times before. And as the hours crawled forward, a call came in to investigators that stopped the room. Her vehicle had been captured on a highway camera. But the direction it was traveling made absolutely no sense. A quick montage unfolds in the mind's eye. Border cameras lighting up with her license plate. Officers leaning over monitors. A family gripping onto hope as reporters gather outside their home. Investigators speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Every frame raising more questions than answers. Because Helen's Christmas journey was supposed to bring her closer to home. Yet for reasons no one could explain, her car moved farther away. Farther and farther. Until it crossed into another country entirely. And that is when everything changed. Within 24 hours. This case would grip two nations. Helen Jackson was 28 years old. A woman who carried a quiet warmth wherever she went. The kind that made people feel immediately at ease. Without ever needing to raise her voice. She was the second child in the Jackson family. Right between her older brother, Mark, and her younger sister, Emily. A family known for staying close. Closer than most. Even when life pulled them into different cities. Different schedules. Different responsibilities. And yet, every December, no matter what shifted around them, no matter how busy the year had been, Helen always came home. It was more than a tradition. It was a promise. To her mother, she was the calm voice during family chaos. To her father, she was the kid who never forgot to bring his favorite chocolate. To her siblings, she was the one who remembered every inside joke. Every birthday. Every moment that mattered. Helen carried a kindness that didn't need to be spoken about. It simply existed. In the way she listened. The way she laughed. The way she made a room feel warmer by stepping into it. And this year's Christmas was supposed to be the same. Maybe even better. Because she had taken extra time off work. Told her parents she was coming early. And even picked up a surprise gift her mother had hinted at months earlier. Her plan was simple. The same route she had driven for years. A 2-hour stretch of highway. Cutting through small towns, open fields, and long quiet roads. Before reaching the Jackson family home just after lunch, she texted her sister before leaving. "On my way, save me some cookies." She locked her apartment, carried her overnight bag down the stairs, and stepped into the bitter December air. Without a single concern in her voice. Or in her heart. Helen was expected to arrive by noon. She had driven that path so often that her father used to joke. She could make the trip with her eyes closed. But on this particular morning, as the Jackson family waited, and the clock ticked past every familiar checkpoint, something felt off. Her phone stopped responding. Her location never updated. Her car did not appear on any of the usual traffic cameras. No delays. No weather issues. No warning signs. Nothing. It was as if the road swallowed her. Quietly. Instantly. Without leaving a trace. And the longer the silence stretched, the heavier it became. Because while the Jackson family prepared Christmas lunch, sat by the window, refreshed their phones over and over, one truth slowly crept in. A truth they tried not to say out loud, because saying it made it real. Helen wasn't just late. Something else was happening. Something no one could understand. Something that would unravel an entire holiday. And forever change two nations. But no one knew that this short holiday trip would become a nightmare. A nightmare that was only just beginning. On the night before Christmas Eve, Helen Jackson finished packing her small overnight bag. Neatly, carefully, just as she always did. A warm sweater folded at the bottom. A pair of comfortable shoes. A book her sister had recommended. And the wrapped gift she planned to place under the Jackson family tree. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing rushed. Nothing that hinted at what was about to unfold. She moved around her apartment with calm familiarity. Turning off lights. Checking doors. Unplugging the coffee machine she never trusted. And at 10:14 p.m., she made her final phone call of the night. Her mother answered with her usual excitement. Already planning breakfast. Already imagining Helen walking through the doorway with her smile. 6 calm, uneventful minutes. They talked about the weather. The holiday movies on TV. And the cookies cooling on the kitchen counter. Helen promised she'd be on the road by early morning. Her mother said she'd keep the porch light on. Just like she always did. That was the last phone call. The last time anyone in the Jackson family heard her voice. By sunrise. Helen locked her apartment door behind her. She carried her bag with one hand. Her keys in the other. Moving through the quiet hallway of her building. Security footage captured her at 7:31 a.m. Walking toward the exit. Hair tucked into her scarf. Gloves in her pocket. With no sign of hesitation. She reached her car. A silver compact sedan she kept spotless. A car that had never given her trouble. The camera caught her unlocking the door. Placing her bag in the passenger seat. Sitting down. Adjusting the mirror. And then pausing for a brief moment. As if checking something on her phone. So ordinary. That no one thought twice about it. Until much later. At 7:36 a.m. Her car pulled out of the apartment parking lot. Heading toward the familiar 2-hour route to her family home. Traffic records logged her entering the main highway at 7:52 a.m. Right on schedule. Right where she should have been. Eyewitness accounts later confirmed they saw her car traveling normally. No signs of speeding. No signs of struggle. No unusual movements inside the vehicle. Everything appeared routine. Predictable. Safe. But then, a detail emerged in the timeline. Small at first. Easy to overlook. But crucial. At 8:17 a.m., Helen's car passed a roadside camera far earlier than expected. As if she had taken a slightly different turn. A turn she had never taken before. Not enough to raise alarm at the time. But enough to create a gap in the timeline that investigators would agonize over later. That one camera frame was the final confirmed moment of her journey? Because after that, her phone stopped updating. Her car stopped appearing on traffic systems. And the familiar route she had always taken went cold. She vanished. At first, the Jackson family thought nothing of it. Helen had never been reckless. Never careless. But a late arrival wasn't impossible. Maybe she stopped for gas. Maybe she took a call. Maybe the winter traffic slowed her down. Her mother refreshed her phone screen over and over, watching for the small message bubble. The familiar ringtone. Anything. But instead, there were missed calls. Unread messages. Notifications piling up like quiet alarms. Nobody wanted to acknowledge. Her father opened the front door every few minutes, stepping onto the porch, looking down the driveway as if her headlights might suddenly appear through the cold December air. Even though the hours kept passing in silence. Emily, her younger sister, tried to make excuses. She probably stopped to buy something. She's always late on holidays. She'll text any minute. But the laughter she forced out didn't reach her eyes. And by early afternoon, the confusion began to shift into something heavier. The Jackson family group chat, usually filled with jokes, turned into rapid messages sent back to back. Has anyone heard from her? Try calling again. Maybe her battery died. Right? Helen's friends chimed in too, saying they hadn't heard from her since last night. Which was unusual. Especially on Christmas Eve. One friend checked her social media. No activity. Another tried tracking her via location sharing. No signal. That was the moment. The air in the Jackson living room changed. A moment when hope stopped sounding like reassurance and started sounding like denial. Her father stood up, grabbed his jacket, and said quietly, "We're calling the police." At first, there was hesitation. The standard lines. Adults sometimes go off the grid. She might simply be out of range. It's too soon to worry. But her mother's trembling voice, the mounting timeline, the lack of any digital trace, and the icy road conditions pushed the situation past protocol. This wasn't a casual delay. This wasn't normal. By late afternoon, officers arrived at the Jackson home. They opened a missing person file faster than they usually would. Because something about the details felt wrong from the very beginning. Investigators began what they quietly call a before it's too late response. A rapid sweep of the likely route. Phone tower checks. Local patrols notified. Neighboring districts alerted. Maps were laid out on the Jackson dining table. Officers marking the path Helen should have taken versus the path her last known signal suggested. But just as the first search units were dispatched, just as officers stepped into their vehicles to scour the highway, A clue surfaced. A single piece of information. That made the entire case far more complicated than anyone expected. The town of Ashford Ridge woke up to a chilling realization. Helen Jackson, the quiet 28-year-old nursing assistant who left home the previous evening, had simply vanished. And now, for the first time, the investigation began to pull apart the fabric of her final known hours. Detective Marcus Hale, lead investigator with the Missing Persons Unit, spoke softly as he reviewed the timeline. Knew that every second counted. He stood near the bus departure point, where Helen was last seen. We start from here. From the last place the world saw her. Officers fanned out. Checking the pavement. The lampposts. The bus shelter walls. Looking for anything that didn't belong. A discarded coffee lid. A footprint in dried mud. A faint scrape mark on a bench. Every detail mattered. Inside the small security room behind the transit office, Detective Sarah Lynn, the department's CCTV analysis expert, replayed the last known footage. Helen appeared at 7:48 p.m. walking with a small purse. Her phone in hand. Her movements calm, unhurried. Then she sat. Waited. Looked down at her phone again. But at 7:52 p.m., she glanced to her left. As if someone had called her name. Her posture shifted just slightly. And then she walked out of frame. No one could see where she went next. That was the first missing piece. Officers interviewed commuters who passed through the area that night. A bus driver said he thought he saw her talking to someone, maybe a man, but couldn't recall the face. A shopkeeper claimed she saw Helen walking fast, like she was late, but wasn't certain of the direction. A teenage boy insisted Helen got into a car, but then added he wasn't sure if it was her or someone with similar hair. Conflicting stories. Confusing timelines. Detective Hale pressed his fingers against his forehead. These statements weren't aligning. Something or someone was messing with the truth. The Jackson family remained calm, respectful. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just deeply worried. Helen's mother, Marian Jackson, spoke quietly. We just want her home, please, just find her. Her father, Robert Jackson, sat in silence, staring at Helen's childhood photo and whispering her name under his breath. They handed over her devices, recent messages, everything they thought might help. But what the investigators found there was unexpected. Just after 8:12 a.m., an officer called out. Sir, you might want to see this. Behind the bus depot. In a narrow service alley rarely used by the public. They found something lying near a rusted metal fence. Helen's phone. Screen shattered. Battery still warm. But that wasn't the real shock. Inside the phone logs, Detective Lynn scrolled slowly, paused, and exhaled. The phone had pinged. Not near Ashford Ridge, but 52 kilometers away, across the state line. Nearly an hour after Helen supposedly disappeared. Meaning, she hadn't vanished here. She had traveled willingly or not far beyond their jurisdiction. This wasn't just a local missing persons case anymore. It had just become a national investigation. The discovery of Helen's phone shattered, abandoned, and pinging from another region entirely sent a ripple through the small town of Ashford Ridge. But within hours, that ripple became a storm. Because investigators soon realized something far more complicated, far more terrifying. Helen Jackson's disappearance wasn't confined to their borders anymore. This case was crossing into two nations. Helen's phone had last pinged near the Ravenford International border, a crossing notorious for minimal surveillance at night. Why would she go there? Or who took her there? The problem was immediate. Two jurisdictions. Two legal systems. Two sets of investigators. One missing woman. This wasn't just a police matter anymore. It required international cooperation. The moment the cross-border detail leaked, everything exploded. National broadcasters picked up the story. Then international outlets. Then TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. All flooded with hashtag Find Helen Jackson. Hashtag Jackson Family. Hashtag Border Mystery. Speculation spread faster than facts. Some claimed she was trafficked. Some insisted she ran away. Others believed she met someone from online. But the truth remained hidden behind a wall of noise. Still, the world was watching now. People in neighboring towns locked their doors earlier. Parents kept their children closer. Women traveling alone chose to stay home. Yet at the same time, strangers, volunteers, and entire communities rallied together. Over 200 volunteers joined the search. Drones swept the fields. Dog units combed through forests. Flyers were plastered on every window and bus stop. The Jackson family stepped outside briefly. Marion Jackson holding a photo of her daughter. Her voice soft but steady. "We'll never stop looking for her." The nation felt her pain. The world echoed it. Detective Sarah Lynn tapped the map with a pen. "This isn't a simple disappearance," she said. "Someone planned something. Someone moved her." Silence filled the room. The timeline had grown wider. The suspects multiplied. And the truth, whatever it was, seemed to be slipping further out of their reach. Until at 9:41 a.m., a Border Patrol officer radioed in. "We found something." In a dense patch of woodland, just 3 kilometers from the border crossing. A vehicle sat half-buried under leaves and dirt. A dark gray SUV. Windows tinted. Doors locked. Engine cold. But the real shock? The license plate was from the neighboring country. And inside, after prying the door open, officers found a single strand of hair, a crumpled bus ticket from Ashford Ridge, and in the back seat, a faint smear of Helen's lipstick color on the upholstery. Detective Hale's throat tightened. "She was in this car," he whispered. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't an accident. This was a professionally executed transport. Someone had taken her across borders. With purpose. With planning. With precision. And that meant one devastating truth. Helen Jackson wasn't just missing. She was in the hands of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The discovery of the gray SUV changed everything. And investigators knew they had to move fast, before the trail went cold. So they tore open Helen's digital life. piece by piece, signal by signal, minute by minute. And what they uncovered didn't bring clarity. It brought contradictions and questions nobody was prepared for. Helen's phone history showed something unusual. 3 calls made in the hour before she vanished. All to the same number. All unanswered. And the number? Registered to someone Helen didn't normally contact. A man named Trevor Langford. A distant acquaintance from years back. Someone with no recent communication with her. But the last call, the third one, was placed exactly 11 minutes before she disappeared from the CCTV grid. Why was she reaching out to him? And why didn't he answer? Detectives flagged his name. Next, they checked her financial records. Nothing. No withdrawals. No card activity. Not even a fuel purchase. But one detail stood out. Her banking app had been opened at 6:13 p.m. after she was already missing. And not from her phone. Another device. Another location. Someone accessed her account. But why? What were they looking for? And how did they get her password? Investigators noted this as a critical sign of possible coercion. Or something far more deliberate. Detectives combed through cameras from Helen's route. At first, nothing. Just ordinary commuters moving through stations and streets. But then, at 5:42 p.m., a figure appeared behind Helen in a bus terminal clip. A man in a dark coat. Face partially obscured. Walking just a few steps behind her. Not interacting. Not speaking. Just trailing. He appeared in 2 more cameras. Always behind her. When the family was shown the footage, no one recognized him. But investigators did. This was the same build. The same gait. And the same jacket. As someone they had already flagged. Trevor Langford. Detectives reached out to Trevor immediately. He agreed to an interview. Calm. Polite. Cooperative. But his story contained cracks. He claimed he hadn't spoken to Helen in years. Yet her calls to him were less than an hour old. He said he spent the evening at home. Yet camera footage placed someone resembling him at the terminal near her final location. He insisted he had no involvement whatsoever. But grew tense when asked why Helen would call him repeatedly on the night she disappeared. When asked directly, "Why didn't you answer her calls?" he simply looked down and said nothing. Detectives marked him as a key person of interest. GPS analysis revealed something that tightened the tension. Helen's phone traveled in a straight path toward the border, matching the route of the abandoned SUV. But there was more. Trevor's phone, the device he claimed never left his house, pinged off a tower less than 2 kilometers from where the SUV was found. He said he stayed home. The data told a different story. Investigators were convinced the pieces were falling into place. That they were closing in. That the path forward was clear. But then, a new discovery landed on Detective Hale's desk. One that changed everything once again. One that made them question the timeline. The suspects. and even their own assumptions. Because the truth was becoming undeniable. This case wasn't heading where anyone expected. And what came next would turn the entire investigation upside down. With data points scattered across 2 regions. And the timeline full of contradictions. Investigators sat down to reconstruct the critical hours before Helen vanished. Every phone ping. Every sighting. Every detail had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Minute by minute. Meter by meter. Frame by frame. And what emerged was not a straight path. It was a broken trail. Full of gaps, overlaps, and disturbing inconsistencies. Helen leaves her home at 5:12 p.m. Phone connected to her car's Bluetooth. Driving playlist activated. Normal. Routine. Everything here fits the timeline perfectly. But the next piece does not. Her phone signal dips for 47 seconds. On a quiet stretch of road. With no tunnels. No large structures. Nothing that would block reception. Witnesses later recall a black SUV parked oddly on the side of that same road. At the time, nobody thought twice about it. Now, that moment stands out like a warning flare. Helen enters the terminal. Alone. Walking with purpose. Like she's meeting someone. The man in the dark coat. Trailing. Never catching up. Never overtaking. Detectives freeze frame his stride. Compare it to Trevor's gait. And the similarity is undeniable. But here's where things fracture again. Trevor's phone wasn't at the terminal. It pinged from a residential area. 7 kilometers away. At the exact same minute. Either Trevor wasn't the man in the footage. Or someone was carrying his device. Both possibilities were equally unsettling. Helen's account was opened. From a device that wasn't hers. GPS placed that device near the Ravenford borderline. Detectives flagged it as intentional access, possibly used to check balances, PIN attempts, or recent transactions. But then something even stranger surfaced. The device used to access her account had no SIM card, no call history, and had only been powered on for less than 30 minutes. A burner device. A temporary phone. Used once. And then gone. At 6:48 p.m., a witness came forward. A truck driver. Passing through the wooded border route. He reported seeing a woman matching Helen's description. Standing near the gray SUV. With 2 individuals. 1 male. 1 female. He couldn't see their faces. He couldn't describe their voices. But he remembered something chilling. She didn't look like someone asking for help. She looked like someone waiting. Because she didn't think she was in danger. This contradicted everything investigators believed. Why would Helen appear calm? If she was being abducted? Unless she wasn't. Between 5:42 p.m. and 6:48 p.m. something happened. Something major. Something orchestrated. Helen traveled nearly 17 kilometers. Without using her own car. Without using public transport. And without being seen again. That hour. Was the cracks in the case? Detectives walked through the sequence again. Slowly. Carefully. Pairing each timestamp with each location. And it was during this reconstruction that the key break appeared. A technician checking older data noticed an unreviewed camera file. A backup feed stored on a secondary server, used only for overflow data. Footage almost nobody checks. But this time, they did. And at 7:03 p.m., a vehicle crossed into the neighboring country. A gray SUV. Same model. Same damage on the rear bumper. But the passengers were the real shock. Because the backup footage captured a face in the back seat. Just for a split second. A reflection in the glass. And investigators froze. Zoomed in. Enhanced the contrast. The face was unmistakable. It was Helen. Alive. Awake. Staring out of the window. As if she was looking for someone. Not terrified. Not restrained. Just watching. And beside her, a woman no one had ever seen before. A woman investigators had not identified. A woman who did not match Trevor. Or any known contact in Helen's life. This was the moment that changed the entire trajectory of the case. Because now it was clear. This wasn't just an abduction. This wasn't just one suspect. This wasn't a single country investigation. Helen was crossing borders. With people she seemed to know. And whatever happened next would grip both nations. In ways nobody was ready for. For days, investigators on both sides of the border pushed deeper into the search. Piecing together every movement. Every sighting. Every unexplained moment. Between Helen's disappearance and that final glimpse of her in the back seat of the gray SUV. And finally, the breakthrough came. Not from a confession. Not from a suspect slipping up. But from something much quieter. A route. A pattern. A single path Helen and her unknown companion followed. Through miles of remote woodland. And abandoned service roads. A path that ended in a place no one expected. Near the border. Deep in a stretch of land. Rarely used except by hikers and old logging crews. Sat a wooden cabin. Weathered. Unmarked. Far from the nearest town. The SUV's tracks led straight to it. And stopped. Inside, officers found Helen's scarf. 2 mugs on a table. A small travel bag with her initials. And on the wall, a makeshift pinboard. With printed photos, maps, and handwritten notes. It was the first undeniable sign that Helen had been alive. Inside that cabin. And she hadn't been alone. Her identity came next. She was not a stranger. Not random. Not connected to Trevor at all. She was someone from Helen's past. Someone removed from her life for years. A childhood friend. A friend who had lived across the border for over a decade. A friend with whom Helen had severed ties after a painful falling out years earlier. But what investigators learned next reshaped everything. The two had recently reconnected. Quietly. Privately. messaging each other on encrypted apps, phone calls made late at night, using secondary numbers. And on Christmas Eve, Helen planned to see her again. This wasn't an abduction. It wasn't a forced disappearance. It was a meeting, kept secret from everyone. But the reason behind it was where the truth became heartbreaking. Investigators discovered a long thread of messages between Helen and her old friend. Messages filled with unresolved pain, family disagreements, and a need for closure. Before the new year began, Helen had been struggling silently. She wanted space to think, to speak to someone she once trusted. The friend lived near the border, so Helen planned a brief detour before continuing her trip to her parents. But the weather turned harsh that night. Visibility dropped. The roads became slick. And somewhere during the final stretch, toward the cabin, everything changed. Just off the service road, barely visible beneath fallen branches, search teams found the final, devastating piece. The gray SUV had veered off the road on a sharp bend and overturned down a small embankment. It wasn't staged. It wasn't covered up. It was an accident. Inside the vehicle were two occupants. And based on the forensic timeline, impact analysis, and final phone data, Helen had passed away almost instantly upon collision. Her friend, critically injured, disoriented, barely conscious, managed only to crawl a few meters away before succumbing to hypothermia. In the freezing night, there was no chase, no kidnapping, no foul play, just a tragic attempt to reconnect with someone from her past. A private meeting meant to heal old wounds that ended in a fatal accident, made worse by remote roads and brutal winter conditions. Authorities from both nations released a joint statement. Cause of death, accident. No evidence of criminal involvement. Timeline confirmed by digital and physical evidence. Border footage validated the last moments. Both families notified personally. Before the information became public, the case reached its conclusion. Not with handcuffs, not with accusations, but with quiet, devastating truth. There were still questions that lingered. Why didn't Helen tell her family? What was said during their final meeting? Was reconciliation possible? What emotional weight had she been carrying alone? Some questions will never have full answers. But one thing became clear. Helen wasn't running from her life. She was trying to understand it. Trying to make peace with a part of her past before stepping into her future. Two nations watched this case unfold, believing something unimaginable had happened. And in the end, what they found was something far more human. A journey taken in hope, lost to tragedy, remembered by all who searched for her. Helen Jackson's story did not end in mystery. It ended in truth. A truth that brought sorrow, but also closure. The news of Helen Jackson's fate spread slowly at first, like cold water across a winter landscape. touching everyone who had followed the case. At the Jackson family home, silence filled the rooms. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet grief. The kind that settles into your bones. Her mother, Marion, sat by the fireplace, clutching a framed photo of Helen from last Christmas. Her lips moving silently as she whispered her daughter's name. Over and over. Not as a plea, but as remembrance. Her father, Robert, walked the driveway, checking the mailbox, perhaps hoping for a sign. A letter. Anything to feel her presence again. Emily, her sister, held on to the little things. Helen's scarf. Her favorite mug. Reminders of someone who had been gone, but was never forgotten. The Jackson family shared one quiet wish. That the world remember Helen not for her death, but for her life. Across Ashford Ridge and neighboring towns, people came together. Neighbors offered blankets to search teams, hot drinks to officers on cold nights, and joined in silent vigils outside the family home. Even strangers across the border held candles in solidarity, watching the news updates, following every detail, praying for closure, or just hoping to understand what happened to Helen Jackson. Communities that had never met felt united by a shared heartbreak, by a shared search for truth. The case brought two nations together in ways rarely seen. Task forces coordinated, digital evidence shared, border protocols reviewed. Officers learned from each other, sharing techniques, cameras, and data analysis tools. Agreements that usually took months were expedited in days. The cooperation not only solved the Jackson case, but also created a blueprint for future cross-border investigations. Because Helen's disappearance had been a tragic accident, there were no criminal charges filed against any other parties. Investigators did, however, recommend changes. Stricter monitoring of remote border roads, guidelines for safe travel in isolated areas, public awareness campaigns for emergency check-ins. The case inspired social conversations about mental health, about reconnecting safely, about being aware of the risks even when intentions are good. Helen's story became a reference point in both nations' safety workshops. Her memory shaping policies designed to prevent similar tragedies. The impact wasn't measured in arrests, or trials, or headlines. It was measured in hearts, in lessons learned, and in a family slowly finding a way to honor their daughter's life. Friends and neighbors still speak of Helen Jackson, not as a victim, but as a young woman who sought connection, and whose story reminded everyone how fragile life can be, and how precious. The case left sorrow, yes, but also awareness, and a sense that the world had watched and remembered. Even after the investigation closed, even after both nations had confirmed the facts, there were questions that lingered, unanswered, floating in the quiet spaces of memory and grief. Why didn't Helen tell anyone? Not her parents. Not her sister. Not even close friends. That she planned to see someone from her past? Why had the journey taken her so far? To roads so isolated. To places so unforgiving. Where even the smallest mistake could be fatal? And how often do we assume that the people we love are safe? even when they walk paths we cannot see? Helen Jackson's story reminds us that life is fragile, that intentions, even loving ones, can collide with circumstances we cannot control, that a holiday meant for warmth and family can also bring tragedy in ways that no one could foresee. And yet, in her story, there is also reflection and a quiet teaching about trust, about connection, about paying attention to the moments we share before they become memories. So we ask ourselves, softly, almost too quietly to hear, what would you do if someone you loved walked a path unknown to you, just to find peace, or closure, or a piece of themselves that they needed to carry forward? Some answers we may never find, but the questions, they stay with us. They make us human. Helen Jackson's story began with a simple journey, a holiday meant for family, warmth, and celebration, and ended in a way that none could have predicted. Two nations watched, two communities searched, and countless lives were touched by the fragile threads of hope, fear, and loss. It is a story of human connection, of choices made quietly, of paths walked alone, and of the weight carried in silence. The Jackson family, their grief, their love, remains at the center of this tale, reminding us all of the fragility of life and the power of remembrance. And yet, even as the case closes, the questions linger quietly in the spaces between the facts and the human heart. If you want to explore more stories, more journeys, more cases that challenge what we think we know, and uncover truths hidden in the shadows, share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, for remembering, for staying safe, and for staying curious.